All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome at our core protocol sync that we are usually doing every 2 weeks, but last week was the offsite, so it will be a little bit lighter on the events than usual. And Shamil was traveling a lot, so he'll not be here again, but I think I can cover his updates. Shouldn't be a problem. So let me, I guess, start with that. Should be this one. Okay, you should see it. So on Shamil's side, he implemented initial version of the block importing from the DSN, which is a solution to the farmer's dilemma. However, those pieces that we are downloading and as a result blocks we are reconstructing, they're not really verified in any way. So the progress was made towards that. The first part was to add persistence of the whole complete root blocks on the node. Before that, we only had record roots in the runtime state, and we didn't even persist root blocks in any way, except in LRU cache, which is really short term. So this pull request basically adds persistent storage that node will later be able to share with others when they make requests, such that the node that is trying to sync from the DSN can kind of figure out the quorum, like what the canonical chain of root blocks is, and then from there they can download the whole chain, and then from there they can verify the whole history. So they don't need to like make quorum on every segment from the pieces they downloaded and stuff like that, which makes things much easier. So this first pull request was about adding that persistence, and the second pull request was about adding request response protocol, such that you can make requests to DSN and get those root blocks in response. And it was added to node and to farmer. And farmer, I believe, will proxy request to the node because node already has it, so it will not duplicate the storage. So those were basically two main changes that were landed. There are some other works in progress, but not in the form of pull requests. Any questions about this? All right. About stuff I was doing on the code side. So there were basically a bunch of things I noticed in Gemini 3C that had to be fixed. And there are basically different fixes for that. So this pull request was, there is a description, of course, but basically there are several things that are happening on the farmer when we are receiving announcement about a particular piece available on the network. We will check whether we have it in the cache. We will check whether we already have it plotted, whether we have announced that, and then if we didn't and we should cache it, then we will try to pull it from the network. We will store it. We will announce it, and things like that. Turns out that all of that is kind of slow and it takes a while, especially the networking part. And because of that, I decided to separate that whole thing into two parts. The first part is the quick one, which is to take the local state cache, verify if you have it. If you don't, we will try to pull it from the announcer and get it locally. And then separately, we will try to re-announce it, but in the background thread if we didn't reach capacity. So we will try to still persist it, even if we cannot re-announce it. Because the reason why we are persisting it is because we are close to the key by node ID. And that means that we can receive requests later for that piece to us, and we should be able to reply. So even though we may not announce that we have it, someone will still find us because we're just close to the key anyway, right? And we can re-announce it later. So the goal was to basically reduce the number of times when we cannot actually process this request at all, and instead to try at least persist it locally, if not re-announce. So that was the solution. There is a small discussion here, I believe, with Shamil, but that is kind of the goal of this pull request. It didn't resolve the problem fully, but it made it much less prominent. Does it make sense?
Question.
Mhm.
Will we be pruning any of those pieces at later time, or will we just keep it for as long as we want it? Like,
The cache size is bounded, and we basically keep certain like amount of pieces in total closest to our ID. So some will be evicted if they are further away. Okay. This next one is basically just some refactoring. Nothing major there. Then Rahul was debugging one panic that we found. That previous pull request kind of avoids it, but it doesn't fix the root problem. And turns out somehow that there are two events in a peer-to-peer. One is connection established, and the other one that should be symmetric, connection closed after it was established, logically. They're not actually symmetrical. We are getting connection closed much more often than the connection established. And we had underflow of our number, which will panic in the debug mode, but it will actually underflow and wrap over in the production mode. So we were getting some strange numbers in terms of the, what was it? In the semaphore. It was like astronomically large numbers for no reason. So what I did is purely additive check to keep track of established connections per peer. And if you didn't know about it, then you just ignore this connection. Actually, what I should do here, I should actually add some kind of warning so we can have more context how often it happens and why it happens. And there is a discussion in the peer-to-peer. Folks are also surprised that it happens, but this is a workaround. The idea is that we can revert this pull request completely, like all of the lines that have changed, once we figure out what it is and how to fix it. But we don't know under which circumstances it happens. It just know it does happen sometimes. Sometimes it happens within a minute after launch, sometimes within a few hours. So yeah, interesting, tricky problem.
is it also possible for us to ensure the additive or subtraction is more checked rather than saturating?
We are not saturating that. So we have fixed the problem on the semaphore side. Here we are just checking. It's not. It doesn't check the overflow. We just fetch add and fetch sub in here. We just like prevent it from causing problems because the assumption was those are symmetrical. Turns out not necessarily, but we'll fix it.
So the semaphore had a very strict check and panic if some invariant is violated. In this case,
Yeah.
we happened to be violating, so we panicked.
Yeah. We are basically trying to remove semaphore entries which were not there, which doesn't make any sense logically. Okay. This was just a kind of temporary solution. There is basically a warning which we cannot fix right now, but we will because it requires some work in libpeer itself, probably, likely. So for now, we just upgraded to debug, so the logs look a little bit nicer. That's the only reason. There is a to-do with discussion. Yes, cache for providers. Yeah, basically on the farmer side, we had separation for different kinds of announcements that we are aware of. One of them was announcements from the outside. Someone announced that they have something to us, and the other like section was something we have announced to someone. But that second section doesn't really have to be persisted because we already know what we have plotted. We already keep it in memory basically, so we can infer that like iterator on the fly anytime we need to reproduce it. So this pull request cleaned up a little bit of code to make sure we don't store extra things. We kind of already did it on the node side, I believe, because we already cache only recent things and we know how much recent things we have. So this is kind of similar check on the farmer just to decrease the burden and number of writes and reads and everything. And oh yeah, this is the symmetrical change on the node side, because we were also persisting things we have announced, but we kind of have it in memory already. So that was completely unnecessary. And yeah, just a little bit of refactoring to get rid of it. So these are all of the things code-wise. What I need to do, I need to figure out a few things this week. The biggest one will be this one. Yeah, I think this one. No, should be linked somewhere. Yeah. So there is this discussion on peer-to-peer. Basically, the way that the provider, not the provider, record store or something like that. Basically, there is a store in a peer-to-peer that persists records and providers, and it has synchronous API. So that causes a few problems. First, it's blocking the networking stack completely while we are doing something, and we have database which is synchronous calls to the file system, which is a problem. The other problem is there is no acknowledgement for that. What I mean by that is when we are checking something in kind of like event loop, we get an event that someone announced something to us. And you're like, okay, let me process that. But the event loop moves forward already because you don't want to block it. And it is already ready to receive next announcement. So we are just being bombarded with announcements at the rate which we cannot process. And that's why we had that warning. And that's why we had a whole bunch of other issues. We're kind of trying to fix those. But the basic solution is we need to stop receiving messages from peers that are bombarding us with announcements until we can process them. So that way, the sender of announcements will also be throttled and everything will work well, and we will be able to persist everything we need in time and so on. We will not lose data. So there is some discussion with maintainers here. There are a few pointers what I can research and should research. This is something I plan to do this week. Hopefully like today, maybe tomorrow morning, so I can join the peer-to-peer community call, not community call, Rust maintainers call tomorrow, and talk to them and give some feedback. So that's the first one. And the other one, we need to figure out what is going on with those asymmetric establishment closing connections. It's kind of strange. So as you may notice, there is no progress on version 2.3 consensus yet. The only progress that was made since last time is this simple list of tasks which can be done already and in parallel that will be required for actual implementation, some primitives. But there was no actual work on getting done any of these just yet. I just need to make sure that Gemini 3C actually works reliably first. But if Rahul or anyone else have time, they can try to crack some of these. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Question on the request acknowledgement. Like, would the receiver have a global request limit for all the senders, or is it just specific to a specific sender? Will we have namespace limit?
Requests are already limited. The issue is that there is no acknowledgement for this particular request. So there is no response that the sender expects back. They just fire and forget. And that's the problem. So what we want, and like on the transport level, they have logical streams. So what we want to do, we want to read from the stream the next message only once we've perceived like the queue of those that we can handle in parallel.
Okay, so bounding the queue limit itself.
Yeah, we don't want to advance forward if you're not ready. And this is not implemented right now. There are some workarounds, so I just need to research. Any other questions? All right. I think that's it on my side. Rahul, what about you?
Yeah, so I have the block relay proposal out for review, and I saw a bunch of comments from Nazar and others. I'm working through those, and I woke up to a bunch of messages on the thread that Nazar started with the Substrate folks. I'm kind of going through that now. So based on that, hopefully in next 2 or 3 days we'll have a better handle on which way to go. So after that, one of the first things I wanted to do in that as part of that was like build a small like load test kind of thing to so that we can quantify where we are right now, and as we make the changes, uh, like keep an track the progress or any regression that we cause. So I'll start working on that this week, building a benchmark. So I may need some help there. I'll probably reach out to Nazar or someone about spinning up a small cluster so that we can do some benchmarking. So I'll get that going independent of the design because that is anyway kind of concurrent activity. I think Nazar asked a question in the design proposal why we need a benchmark. So it is for this reason. So I want to make sure like our changes don't cause any regression or anything. If let's say there's
Okay, so not only theoretical, but like implementation wise as well.
Yeah, implementation, because all these things like graphene and all like very researchy things. So they measure the performance on some kind of uh, uh, traffic patterns, which may suit their purposes. I don't know if it directly applies to the way we do things. So with our traffic pattern, we may see different amount of gains. So that's why I want to make sure like we build a benchmark so that we can assess how much improvement we are seeing with Subspace kind of workload. So does that make sense?
There is a thing that Polkadot uses called ZombieNet.
Yes,
I believe that's the tool we can potentially use for like spinning up a few nodes and see how they behave. I didn't use it and didn't read much about it, but they do use it for like different testing purposes.
Yeah, Jeremy also mentioned that to me last time we talked. Let me look into that. But otherwise, how do people like bring up like clusters for doing any kind of testing, or you just directly do it on the testnet that we launch? What is the flow?
I mean, we have Gemini 3C, which is more or less stable kind of network. There is also what we call XNet. I believe it was renamed to DevNet. I guess we can do experiments there. You can just spin up a few VMs on DigitalOcean, try it out for a few hours or days, and then shut it down.
Okay. Because I may need to bring up like custom binaries with my changes, which are not yet in any tree or something like that. Which are not.
You can build container images in your like fork, or we can create a snapshot and you can run from there.
Okay, maybe when I get there, I'll probably ping you to get some specific details. So yeah, that is where the block relay stuff is. And I haven't looked at the CKCG and other things. I briefly talked to Daria about that during the offsite, what she plans to do next and where she's blocked. So this week, hopefully, I'll find some time to work on that. And the consensus directory thing, that list of items that Nazar created. Maybe I'll try to spend time on that and make some progress there. Yeah.
And on that upstream discussion in Substrate about
yeah, I'm just responding to that.
It seems like they're not really much open to customizing or making it customizable. They just say disable gossiping and implement your own thing on top if you want.
Yeah, actually, I was reading a thread. They seem to have like a split opinion. Like the last one, the last post in the thread seems to say do everything downstream by BKCHR.
Yeah.
So I'm responding to that right now. Let's see.
Yeah, Bastian is like implementation maintainer, right. And the other one, I forgot his name.
The first guy, Burgess.
He's more like a researcher.
Yeah, Burgess, right?
Yeah, Bastian would be the one would be reviewing your PR if you're pushing anything upstream. Yeah. So
at least in Substrate, not like some underlying libraries.
Yeah, so Bastian seems to think similar to the design that we proposed so far. I'm giving him more specifics in the thread. Let's see how it goes. But yeah, I think we can do it uh, outside the stack by doing our own thing. But I don't know if that also may need some changes to the substrate stack. It won't be like
No, actually,
completely.
there is a flag I believe that you can set that will stop announcing blocks automatically. So you can do announcement over your gossip or request response protocol, whatever you might have, and then you can handle it from there.
I see. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'll figure the details, but let me first answer to that thread. But I see value in making it modular, even in the uh, upstream substrate, so that in future it'll be easier to, so that we don't have to go through hoops like this to implement new protocols.
To give a little bit of context, they are very Polkadot biased in some of the decisions. And on the other hand, we will likely not use substrate networking long term. So if we have just request response protocol on top, it will be easier to migrate to our own networking stack rather than like integrating it deeply into substrate itself.
So what do you mean, like we won't be using substrate networking?
So right now we have two networking stacks. We have what substrate is shipped by default, but we also have DSN on the side, kind of. So we will likely migrate to our DSN networking stack eventually.
DSN gets used only after a block is finalized and we decide to archive it or something, right? If I understand correctly.
Kind of, but it's also used for requests by others, and we also use it to actually sync the node on the start, which is what Shamil is working on. So it gets deeper and deeper integrated, and yeah.
I see. Okay, I'll probably try to close the loop on this week, depending on how the substrate folks may respond and all.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Thanks, Rahul. The proposal looked great. I think we are on the right path there. Vishen, do you have anything on the protocol side?
Nope. Just to
Anything that
observe
bothers you?
space.
Okay.
Actually, just I think a small, like a minor issue, like on the currently the block like import notification like used on the executor. I think that probably maybe related to the other usages maybe in the future. So I'm creating a peer subscript here to create a new block import notification for every imported block, like regardless the sync state. So, yeah. Once that's resolved, we can address that issue. Yeah.
So the current one is only about the tip update, right?
Yeah. So it's only when you sync to the tape or there's a reorg.
I see. Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So in that sense, if something gets imported, we get the entire chain set between the latest step from what we imported previously. Like in that sense, do we get the entire set of the block events, or is that what you're suggesting, Dushan?
No, I think if just one block is added, it will tell you which block was added. Like, you know, that was just one block. So supposedly you've already imported everything else. But what right now is happening, you only get that notification about the very last block when it switches to that branch. But you have missed all of the below blocks.
Okay, cool. But isn't the client blockchain events already does that though? Like, wouldn't the client isn't client blockchain events already send you as soon as it imports a new block, irrespective of whether it's in the canonical chain or not?
Our notification from consensus does send it, but it sends it right before the block is actually imported. And we had edge cases where the execution layer tries to process something which is not yet quite in the canonical chain because it didn't quite finish importing. So it was a strange problem to have, but yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so I think
current one. Yep.
Okay, cool. I think that also uses up a bit of relay logic as well. Yes, thanks.
Okay. Daria, you are next. We cannot hear you. That's why I prefer wired headphones. Battery never dies.
It's better. Hello? Yeah, I have to use the normal mic of the MacBook. I don't know why it doesn't work. So for last couple of weeks before the offsite, I was finishing the consensus V2 presentation and the spec. The presentation, I think, was a success. I have a plain English explanatory write-up that we will eventually post publicly as a blog when we have a little more, well, I have a little more bandwidth and after we resolve some of the algorithmic blockers, which are going to be my primary concern this week. One of them is resolving exactly the erasure coding for plotting after we have constructed Chia's proofs of space, because some of them are missing. And that our erasure coded points are not exactly connected to source points as is usually implemented at all the implementations we have found. So I just need to sit on this attentively for a couple of days. I have a potential solution that I have posted on research channel, but I need Chen to look at it, whether it actually makes sense. And if not, try to find another one. So that's the primary goal, because without this, we cannot implement. It's not going to work. The second blocker, which I need to resolve next, is erasure coding of commitments at archival, because ArcWorks library was able to do it. I'm not sure if CKZG is able to do it, or we need to change it a little bit, or maybe have a separate implementation in Rust, because it used to work in our previous implementation that was using ArcWorks. So I need to look at, just gonna rewind and look at that back again and get some Rahul's help to maybe modify, and we discuss some of that on the offsite. So that would be.
Didn't we use FFT there, like FFT, IFFT?
We ended up
Sort of
using
the-
IFFT for because it needed to be decodable, but now in archiving doesn't really need to be decodable. It's just to be it's the previous implementation of the previous implementation, basically.
Wait, but archiving, we are doing erasure coding in archiving for the purposes of reconstruction, if necessary.
Yes, but then that IFFT thing was not entirely correct. So in the purpose of erasure coding, it was fine. It was because we used it for plotting, which was again not entirely correct, but it kind of worked. I just need to go back and unseal all of that stuff and put together the actual correct one, what it has to be. And again, this is a blocker, but we could have a version that works without this, just by erasure coding everything or committing to every piece instead of erasure coding the commitments. So that's one option that's going to work. It's going to be slower, but it can work and we could proceed. But I prioritize resolving it next. So hopefully next couple of weeks. Again, I just need to dig up the stuff that we were doing the last time with all of this and look at CKZG, what can it do and how it has to be done.
Okay, any questions, concerns from anyone? All right, anything else we need to share before we close out? All right, I guess that's it. It was a little bit lighter than usual, but I'm sure we'll be back in 2 weeks with much more updates. See you.